Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlos McMillan Fuentes, and I am the president of the board of the Sacramento Community Concert Association. We appreciate you joining us for this virtual broadcast, the first of many, where we are going to do a spotlight on an important member of our music community. And so we are very privileged and very fortunate to have with us today the lovely flautist extraordinaire, Laurel Zucker. How are you doing today, Laurel?
Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing really well.
Oh,
Happy to
good.
be here. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. So, although she is a fixture of our musical community here, I want to just tell you a little bit about her and let you know why we're so fortunate to have her with us today. Miss Zucker can be heard regularly on worldwide classical radio stations. She has performed many times in Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, Tully Hall, Avery Fisher Hall, Mondavi Center, and more. As a concert soloist, she's been featured with orchestras across America, Italy, Budapest, Russia, and here at home with the Sacramento Philharmonic. She is also active as a chamber musician and as a published composer, with works distributed by several publishers. She's an active supporter of the flute community and currently serves as Professor of Flute at California State University in Sacramento.
Thank you.
We are so happy to have you here today. And many will know you from your impressive catalog as a performer. I mean, you've been able to do so many wonderful things as a musician. And I just wanted to ask, when do you first feel as though you have made it as a classical musician? And if so, when did you first feel that way?
I don't think I've ever felt that way. I've never felt like I've, made it. I think the reason is that my life is all about learning new music. And so the act of learning new music for me is reading through sloppily a score. And then gradually, as I practice it, trying to make it into a masterpiece to perform or record. And so, yeah, I guess I haven't made it yet. I'm just working.
That's beautiful. I think a lot of musicians can certainly empathize with that initial shock of playing a piece for the very first time.
Yes, I love it. I love that process.
Good. I think that is just what sets you apart, you know?
Thank you.
When did you discover, in addition to these gifts as a performer, that you also have a gift for composition?
I grew up in New York City, and my parents had this beat up piano, upright in Washington Heights in a small apartment. My mother told me there were mice running through, but it's New York City. And my first memories are when I was 2 or 3, sitting at the piano, and I guess my dad was sitting next to me or my mom, and I was like banging away on the piano, and all I thought about was like, I'm a great composer. I'm so amazing. And I really do remember that very clearly. I guess my parents have been, they were members of the Non-Such Record Club. And so I was used to hearing classical music, but, I kind of got used to very atonal music because I was like banging away all the time. And, I was having a good time. So I suppose that's when I first realized I really liked composing.
That is fabulous. And you've produced quite a body of work, a lot of really incredible compositions along the way.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I've always composed where I am and about politics or culture or animals or plant life or places that I've been and the way I feel inside. So it's like a musical diary for me. It's my way of, I don't have a diary that I write words. I'm not that great with words, but I love writing music, and that's my diary.
Fabulous.
Yeah, yeah.
That is really, really wonderful. It's very, very special and unique, I think, to be able to have, that sort of any kind of a diary, a way of cataloging your experiences and coming back to them and revisiting them, but to do it in such a way where you can be vulnerable in your music and really share it with an audience and have them sharing that experience with you is really special.
Thank you. I think I got into it by just improvising with different guitarists, just playing.
Hmm.
And when I was a student, I was at these conservatories, and I didn't feel like I really had much to offer as a composer. And so I was insecure about doing it. But after I got done with my schooling, I was living still in New York City, and I was really fascinated by the electronics that all the rock guitarists were using. Like, they were using little foot pedals then,
Oh,
like
yeah.
flanges and effect outs. And so I thought, this would be really cool on the flute. So I bought a couple of them and started messing around with them. And then I started writing solo flute music that I used these electronic effects, and I really had a good time with that. And the next thing I did was I met a partner of mine, Davis Sapper, who is a rock guitarist, and we were together for about 9 years, and we formed a group called Poetic Justice, and this was way before the movie came out. We nothing to do with Poetic Justice, but it was many years prior. And so we wrote all this music, and then we started performing in clubs in New York City and California, etc. And that was really exciting. When Davis moved to Florida to become an occupational therapist, we stopped working together in that capacity. We're friends. And then I met somebody named Rebecca Hausman, who is a fabulous doctor, surgeon, and amazing wildlife photographer, especially
Wow.
birds. And I was fascinated by birds. I had even written a piece called Aviary for birds, and loved observing the birds, but especially listening to all the bird calls. And I would try to write down all the the melodic melodies of the birds. I mean, this has been done so many times by composers, but it was
No less
really
difficult.
fascinating. The thing about Rebecca is that she loved going to South and Central America. And so we began going a lot to South and Central America. I think I've been to every country in those continents. And we didn't go to cities. We went right into the jungle. We take dugout canoes, like,
Yeah.
hours, and just end up in these little tiny villages, bitten up with mosquitoes and all that type of thing. But it was really fascinating for me. I was terrified by some of the creatures that I saw. I've seen huge anacondas that just terrified me.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the boas I saw were tiny. They'd hang off the trees. They were little tiny things, like about this big. I couldn't believe it, because I always thought of boa constrictors as these huge, scary snakes, but I've never seen a huge one. Also, the biggest rodent in the world is called a capybara. And I saw flocks, well, no, I guess not flocks, herds of these animals, and they just eat vegetables. So they're not scary, but they're amazing. They're like huge mice that are like 4.5 feet tall.
I think I've seen pictures of them before. They're big animals, but
Yeah,
they're supposed to be very friendly, I believe.
they are. Well,
Friendly.
I can tell you a really funny story. I was, there was no lighting or anything where we were. So when it got dark, we had a torch, or we had a flashlight. So we were having dinner with some other people outside, torches, and I had my little flashlight. I decided, I'm going to go write music now. So I left on my own. staring at the ground, looking for like poisonous whatever,
Right.
and everything, because they're there. I mean, it was scary. And so I was walking and I was like looking down, and suddenly I smelled something really bad. And I looked up, and there was a capybara on his two back legs looking at me. He was about yay tall to me. And we looked at each other. I was this close. I was like a foot away. And he had huge yellow teeth, like this big. They're
Oh my
all
gosh.
like orangish yellow teeth. And we looked at each other, and he screamed, or she screamed, and then I screamed. And then and I ran as fast as I could towards, the place I was sleeping and hanging out. And he ran in the opposite direction. There was a little tiny hill, and he went up. And so at one point or another, I looked in back, and he was back there staring at me. And we both screamed again, and we ran away. So I have really seen a capybara really close up and personal. And that inspired a piece. I wrote a flute and cello piece. It's called The Jabberoo, which is a beautiful story.
Okay. Wow.
And is the capybara sleeps. And the next day I saw a capybara. This is amazing. I saw the capybara sleeping on a caiman head. A caiman is a big alligator.
Yeah. It's a reptile.
Yeah, and I didn't know this, but the jaws are open when gators are sleeping.
Mm.
They're wide open. And so I see this huge capybara sleeping with his head on top of the gator. And so I was like, wow, this is, when else am I going to see something like this? This is wild. I guess they're friends, And I wrote a piece for flute and cello.
That is fascinating. And that's a great combination.
It is. It's a beautiful, there's not that much music for that. I mean, Villalobos wrote a beautiful piece, and François, Francais, I mean.
But very adventurous composer.
Well, when I was in the Amazon, I wrote about 40 pieces while there. Then I stopped going to South America and Central America in the jungles. I just couldn't bear it anymore because I was so scared. I mean, we'd go for like a month, and sometimes I would be so terrified of running into some snake or a jaguar. I mean, I've seen jaguars, pregnant jaguars, which are very dangerous. And I would get scared, and I'd say, you guys go ahead. I'm just going to stay and compose. And so after doing that a while, I thought, I don't want to do this now anymore. So I stopped, and I went to Egypt, and I wanted to go see the pyramids. Mm-hmm. And I did see the pyramids, but I also thought it was like a month before the big revolution of the people that overthrew the government that was really keeping down. And in Egypt, like Cairo, they would have, it wasn't exactly in Cairo, it was in a town next door to it. There was a huge graveyard, but these were graveyards that were only for wealthy people. That's all they had, these huge mausoleums, and you would walk down. That's how you would go there, and then they would be buried in these humongous mausoleums, like as big as my living room, which is that big, but I mean, still.
It's a long place when you're not, a big space when you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, and also the people would get displaced when the person would die, and they'd have to go to another mausoleum. And so I saw this, was thinking the whole time, wow, most of the people are really poverty stricken. They can barely get anything to eat. This is where they live. The government doesn't help them at all. And I was thinking, why haven't they revolted? Well, then a month later, when I got back, the news said they had revolted, and they really it was righteous. They had to. There was no two ways about it. I saw dead horses, or I don't know if they were maybe donkeys, down the Nile. I mean, it was a very weird thing, because you would see these huge buildings that were very wealthy, billions of dollars, right? Banks and all that. And then all the people, except for the really wealthy, lived really badly. I mean, that's what I saw. Maybe there's other ways, but this is what I saw. When I would get on a bus, there were people with machine guns, police, and they would, somebody said to me, "You better get ready to duck if they decide to shoot." So it was
gosh.
Yeah, it was, it was a place in flux, and so I wrote a piece called Middle Eastern Fixation, which is based on our fixation on oil. Then I wrote a Cairo flute concerto that had a movement that was based on all the poverty I had seen and people living in the mausoleums. And then also when I went to the pyramids, I was walking and there would be clusters of people trying to sell you stuff. And so I bought little things, and then I ran out of money. And, one person he said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm French." I was joking with him. And he said, "No, you're not French." And I said, "No, you're right, I'm Italian." "No, you're not Italian." No, I'm from South America." And he just gave up on me. I mean, it was, I was joking around with them, but it was, it was a hard life. They had a very, very hard life, and I have no idea what's going on there now. Probably not that much better, I would imagine,
Sounds like you've had a lot of really fabulous adventures, and your music has taken you really far across the globe.
I want to
travel
so many places. I really want to. I want to go to all these different places, and I like staying in not really fancy hotels and stuff. I'd rather stay in different places where you get to talk to people that are from, from the area, and or communicate with your hands or whatever.
Right.
So I do love traveling.
That's fabulous. What would you say is the most important project that you've worked on so far?
That's an interesting question. I think the most important project I've ever worked on is exactly what I'm working on at that moment. So I know, because I have to throw all of my attention into it. I put my whole world into it, and I practice huge amounts of hours to learn the music and feel it and everything. I read about the composers. Right now I'm recording all of the Joachim Andersen etudes, and there are so many opuses. Every flutist knows these pieces, and there are like 24 to 30 etudes per book. And so during COVID, starting in February, I decided to record them, because what else was I going to do? You couldn't do concerts. All my concerts have been canceled. So I recorded with a friend of mine, Keith Sklower. He came over to my house. We sat in my living room, and I recorded like 5 opuses during the time up till July. I think that's when I ended it. And now I'm working on a really hard opus, Opus 63.
Oh,
I've got 3 more to go. I have 3 more opuses to go, and I'm like very driven. Like if I make a goal for myself, I finish it. I don't let go of it. That's just the way I am. And what's really been great is the reason I decided to record these etudes was because at Sac State, at the university I teach at, I was having a terrible time trying to get students to learn etudes regularly, like bring an etude in a week. And this, I've noticed this semester, and also in the spring when I started telling them I was going to record all of them, they bring in an etude or two a week now. So I succeeded in that goal.
Yeah. There's a lot of value in that I think has been lost in an age where so many YouTube videos and tutorials and all of that good, but also can be pretty dreadful information.
Yes.
I think people maybe in some instances have lost sight of the process and lost sight of the fact that there was a lot of thought and reasoning when those etudes were created. There was a technical aim or a musical aim or some kind of focus that was directly dealt with through the etude, and it may not be as, depending on the etude, of course, it may not be as glamorous as learning a concerto or whatever, but there's certainly a value in it, just the foundational skills, stuff that you need when you go to a concerto,
Absolutely, yeah. Prior to me learning all those, or starting to record all these Anderson, I recorded, one of my flute students gave me an etude book I didn't know, the castrated etudes, and I know his music is incredibly difficult. So nobody had recorded them. Well, maybe a few people, but it wasn't great. I could tell that something else could be done with it. And so they were incredible. And so I recorded all these pieces. There's the Piazzolla etude, tango etude.
Love Piazzolla.
And then, yeah, I do too. And then Donjon and Boza. Boza I have not recorded. Another flute student gave me that book to learn. It's really hard. I've kind of looked at it and not learned it, but one of my high school kids who plays incredibly has learned them all. So she's put me to shame.
If any of my students are listening, if you'd like to purchase some piano literature from me, I hope you're taking some cues, but I digress.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that the flute community is an extremely organized community. We have, like in the US, the National Flute Association, and there's a convention that attracts literally thousands of flutists every year. And so what's been done is that every week there is on there's something called the Etude of the Week. And I don't know who started it, but it's fantastic. And kids or students record on the internet, on YouTube, the Etude of the Week. And so when I was listening, most of the time etudes are played very mechanically, but I feel that it's not that most of the great composers that have written them, they're great compositions. They're absolutely beautiful. There are some that are very passionate. And so when I record these pieces, what I'm trying to do is show a different side of the etude that has to do with real beauty, not just like, I can play as fast as possible, which isn't, which is great,
Has its place, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I have students that can definitely play faster than I can. At this point, I'm 65, so, but there's the musical aspect, and I think, that's something that I have to offer, so, as a teacher.
Yes, absolutely, and there's no real substitute for that. I mean, that is something that you've worked hard for,
Yeah, and my teachers were the most important people in my life, because I stopped living at home when I was 14, and so my first teacher, Philip Dunnigan, was so important to me. There was a school that I went to, North Carolina School of the Arts. It was a public school, paid everything. Parents didn't have to pay a cent. So I lived there for 3 years in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Smoked some cigarettes like Winston-Salem.
Right. Yeah.
Among other things.
As you do.
And he was a very important figure in my life. I got done quickly. So when I was 17, I went to Northern Illinois University for a semester to study with Paula Robeson. And I really didn't know anything about her, but a flutist that was in college while I was in high school, Renee Siebert, who was at Juilliard, was in touch with me, and she said, "Laurel, you got to go study with Paula Robeson." I said, "Great." I called her up and I said, "Can I study with you?" And at that point, my parents had moved to Vermont, and she was at the Marlborough Music Festival, which is in Marlborough, Vermont. And so my parents were working, so I didn't have a ride, but a neighbor lady would give me rides every 2 weeks. And I paid her with blueberries because I didn't have the money to, I didn't, the only
Sounds
money
like a great deal to me. Fair exchange to me.
She was really, really lovely. I mean, I studied with her for about 3.5 years, a very important figure. She stayed in Northern Illinois University for all of a semester, which I was delighted to leave. She went to New England Conservatory, and she took me with her. I didn't even have to audition. I mean, it was
wow.
I know I was very lucky, and like a full ride. I mean, it was just kind of a miracle. And so I stayed there for 3 years. I learned a huge amount and then I decided I wanted to study at Juilliard, and I went to study with. I auditioned, got in, and I went to study with Samuel Barron, who was a very important figure to me as well. I mean, these were people I really held up in the greatest esteem as human beings and as artists. And they were so important to me.
That's very, very impactful.
Yeah. So when I teach, I realize I don't think every student feels, has that, especially at a state university. I don't think, their teacher is the most important figure, but a lot of my students, I do feel like I have that kind of relationship of a mentor, and I take that very seriously. I think that's a very important role to play in somebody's life.
Absolutely. It can be, as you say, it can be a situation where, as in your experience, you really are offering something to this student that nobody else around them is, and between you and I, we know the power that music has in transforming lives and what it can mean for a young person.
Yes.
Which is just something that, a child certainly doesn't always know for themselves, but they recognize it when they feel it, when they have that energy and they have that love that's being poured into them through their music classes or through their music teacher. They know that there's something special about that, and that sticks.
Yes, it does. It's really an important thing. Yeah.
Indeed. So I want to talk a little bit about your travels and all the places around the world. You shared some of your adventures, and you mentioned that you compose while you travel. As you're going to these places, you're creating new pieces. Do you have a very personal connection to any one of the places that you've traveled?
Every place. One place I didn't mention was Knoxville, Tennessee. And I was actually teaching at Sac State University, and believe it or not, I commuted every weekend I would stay like 2 days or 3 days. I would leave like at dark 100, like at midnight. And then I would get there at dark 100 in the morning, like at 7 a.m., and it was just amazing. When I first moved there, I was in a relationship for 9 years, and every place when we were looking for a place to live smelled like barbecue. It was wonderful. So I decided, I started calling it Barbecue Land.
Yeah.
And I even wrote a piece called Barbecue Land. It was for a wind quartet. And, that was a very important place I lived. I do enjoy the South a lot in certain respects. There's a warmth, like people just say hello to you all the time.
Yes.
They're not afraid. They don't seem afraid to say hello.
Yeah.
So it's a little different, although New York City is the same way. I mean, whenever I've gone to New York, people are like, hey, don't walk so fast. Okay, all right. But yeah, it's a very friendly place too. But California can be a little bit more, at least in Sacramento, can be a little bit more standoffish. And I'm not sure why, but it is. And so the South, which I've lived in quite a bit, is a special place for me.
I understand.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And and then I moved to Gig Harbor, Washington, which is completely opposite. It's like the most standoffish place I've ever been in. Like people were oh yeah, they were just into their little world. And I did meet people, and I had a good time and everything like that. And I loved all of the ocean, and I wrote all about the nature there. And so I wrote a concerto, Washington flute concerto, and a trio I wrote that was called Harbor Sounds, so you listen to all the seals and everything, and I tried to put that kind of spacey kind of feel into the music.
It's fabulous. I want to get a little bit into the music of composers of African descent.
Oh, yes.
You have a very wide range of
Huge. Yeah.
Of styles, of composers, of periods in history, all from composers of African descent, which is very interesting to me. So what drew you to this music, to the music of these composers?
Well, the first piece I learned was Prelude by Ulysses K. I don't believe he's alive anymore, but he was in New York City. And so I learned, it's a very short piece. It was like 3 minutes long for solo flute. So I learned that, and I did subsequently, many years later, put it on a recording. And I didn't think anything of it. So years later, decades later, I get this call from a man I didn't know in LA, and he was delightful. And he said, I'd like you to play on a concert that is honoring Martin Luther King's march on Washington. And I said, wow, that sounds great. It was in Zipper Music Hall. Yeah. And I was kind of I didn't ask him, but I kind of wondered why he had asked me, because I wasn't African American, and there are African American flutists out there. So I thought, and then also I had only recorded that one piece and performed it. So honestly, I think I knew William Grant Still and maybe a few others, but I really knew nothing about African American literature for music, because when I went to music stores and looked in flute catalogs, there was nothing, really nothing, usually not even Ulysses K's music. And so I thought, wow. So I'm going to have to do a little research. And that's my favorite thing to do, because I love looking on the internet and trying to find music. So the first thing I did is I went on the internet. I found a couple of sites, databases, that named all of these different African American composers from classical era all the way up. you know, to present time. And I started writing them all down. I had no idea if they had written flute music because I couldn't find any. And then I looked on this site. It was called AFRI, AFRI, Afri American Composers. And I don't know if it's still there, but I started writing down, there was a huge database, and I started writing down all of these composers. And then I started trying to find music that they had written for like flute and piano or solo flute. That's what I focused on at first.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, I really, honestly, I couldn't find anything. I was looking on YouTube for performances and I couldn't find anything. And I was like, well, he wants me to play about 20 minutes. I better figure this out quick. And so then I kept going because, you know, the internet is, you know, so complicated. So I kept going and going and going. And I found people like Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, who had written flute music, Adolphus Hailstork, who is still alive. And I had an opportunity to talk to him. And Samuel Coleridge Taylor. I always get Coleridge Taylor Perkinson and then Samuel Coleridge Taylor mixed up. And I believe that the earlier one was influenced the latter one. People like the amazing classical composer Joseph Boulan Xavier de Saint George. And I couldn't believe it, a classical African-American composer that I didn't know. And he didn't have any flute music. He'd written violin sonatas. So I arranged them all for flute and piano and I recorded them. Undine Smith Moore, amazing. David N. Baker, who was still alive. He died recently. Hale Smith, who died recently. Camille Nickerson, Mark Bax, Leslie Adams, Margaret Barnes. And so suddenly I had my own database, and I started trying to find the music, and I did. I was able to find the music, and in a week I had purchased about $1,500 worth of music, and like 2 weeks later I was like, I had a stack this big of music. It was like really exciting. I was like, yay! This is really great. So I had 6 months or maybe 6 to 7 months before the concert. So I just like dove in. It was during the summer that I had to learn music, and I started just reading. And then I found I mean, I couldn't believe how great the music was. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
And the one thing is the music was extraordinarily expensive. And I thought, wow, you know, this music really needs to be heard. And so I learned all this music, and I put out 3 CDs only of music by composers of African descent. It's all amazing music. It's great music. And many times now on recordings that are mixed, I include African-American composers that I'm running into. So I learned all of this music, and then for that concert, I went, and there were like opera singers from the Metropolitan Opera and cellists and pianists, and I had a wonderful time. And they put us in a really nice hotel, and you know, Zipper Hall's a very nice space to perform in, and they also played it on that LA station. Is it KUSC? I think it's called. And then they put it in a database in a university, and I don't know which one they put it in. But the one thing I realized, because my recordings were played on every radio station, and the only reason they were played is that I personally had mailed them. You know, there's no magic to it. I mailed them. They listened and they liked them and they started playing, and they would contact me. The programmers would contact me and say, what do you have now? You know, and they were all excited because I was putting out so many, you know, and so I knew they'd be really excited about hearing music by African Americans that had never been heard on radio. And so I sent them out. I started doing concerts in other universities and the university I teach in. Played concerts at National Flute Association, which is a great place to do it because there's thousands of flutists. And I also required my flute majors to learn one piece by an African-American composer per semester. And they had to perform it. So they were doing it. When I did concerts at university, other students would do it. And what was fascinating to me is that, you know, there were always African-American flutists, right? And they didn't know any of these composers. And so they were really delighted to, wow, you know, this is great, you know. So that's how that worked out. And then I was going to a church. I'm very sorry, I forgot what it's called, but it was in West Sacramento. And I went with a friend of mine, Jody Finneyfrog, my best friend. And she introduced me to the music director there, Jacqueline Butler Hairston, who of course you know, and she's on the board of the series that we're on. And she was the music director at this church. And so Jody introduced me to her. And Jackie said, why don't you just improvise when the singers are singing? And I thought, okay, I can do that. And so, you know, I'd be improvising to a variety of singers, and I had a blast. I had a really, really great time. Then I found out she's a composer too, a wonderful composer.
Yes, indeed.
And a conductor and an unbelievable pianist. I mean, just gorgeous sound. But she's amazing. I can't believe her technique. And so we talked about it and we decided to do a recording together. So I had done a number of recordings at Skywalker Studios. And I said, let's just go to Skywalker and do recordings. And so we did this recording, which was pretty apropos for today's time, even though it came out several years ago. It's called A Change Has Gotta Come. So it was all spirituals. And it was all this music, mostly that I had never heard. And so she introduced me to huge repertoire of spirituals. And by the way, we are working on, like today, I just started looking at all this music by different by women composers, and we're going to do another spiritual recording in January.
It's fabulous. Speaking of compositions by women, I have a work here from the composer Undine Smith Moore. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with her music? I understand that she's known as the Dean of Black Women Composers. How do you think she earned that title?
Well, I mean, I think she had a doctorate. I mean, you know, all of the composers that I'm familiar with get doctorates at all of these universities, like Fisk University, and all of the, most of the time at the universities that were formed in the South after the Civil War for African Americans. And it's amazing. I mean, all the composers I've been talking about, they all have doctorates. I don't have a doctorate. I mean, they're brilliant. They're brilliant human beings and brilliant composers. And they, even the most I'm going to switch over, but even the most technical pieces that I do, like David N. Baker, and it's very contemporary, but you can hear African-American spirituals or non-spiritual music in their music, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's really something very special. So I feel very honored to. I really love playing their. I love playing all music. Really, I like learning new music.
Fabulous. So this particular recording comes from the Afro-American Suite by Undine Smith Moore. This is the fourth movement, and you, of course, are the flute, and John Kotza is piano, and
Yes,
Namo Chen is cello.
yes, they're both amazing musicians.
Let's listen to a little.
Okay, thank you.
Woo!
That's such a great piece. I mean, she's an amazing composer.
Really wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'd also like to share an example of a piece by Adolphus Hailstork, another composer you mentioned. This comes from his Pied Piper of Harlem solo flute suite. This is Here Come de Piper.
Thank you.
Bravo!
And, you know, I know you have met him also, but he's such a nice man. I talked to him a couple times on the phone. He was really, really sweet.
I wish I were fortunate to say that I've actually met him and worked with him in person, but I was able to perform one of his compositions when I was in high school. He
Oh, okay.
composed a set of choral pieces called Seven Songs of the Rubaiyat,
Oh,
and
yeah. Yes.
they are incredible. It was just such a transformative experience because every setting is unique and everyone is very, you know, he uses the choir in a different way in different pieces. Some are very full bodied, you know, everybody singing together. And then sometimes it's very mysterious where you have drones, you know, beautiful sort of harmonies being drawn out, and just
Yeah.
incredible, exquisite writing. Fabulous composer.
Yeah, he's a great, you know, he's a great composer, and you're right. He writes very contemporary sounding music, like the sonatina that I learned, and then a more popular uh, folk music type of sound of this particular piece you just played.
It's fabulous. So, in your opinion, why
Yes.
should people listen to these works by these composers that are unknown to them? I mean, there's so many great pieces by Beethoven and Bach and Mozart, true. Why should people listen to these composers?
Because it gets awfully dull just listening to the same old. I mean, that's my feeling about it. I cannot stand to play the same music over and over and over again. I just can't. I can't tolerate it. I have to be learning new music all the time. And I don't think a lot of I don't know if a lot of musicians feel that way. I ran into a really amazing flutist that I ended up performing with, Jasmine Choi. I mean, I think she's like the greatest flutist in the world right now. And we were talking, you know, before we were performing, and she said, "Oh, I have to be learning music all the time. I get so bored otherwise." And she memorizes everything. I mean, she's much younger than me, and I used to memorize everything too, not anymore. But she's an amazing performer from, I believe, Korea. Yeah, really great artist. Yeah. So I don't know if I truly. I mean, that's one aspect of the answer. The other is that I really think the way to learn about a culture is through the arts, and because African Americans have contributed so much to the classical world, to the jazz world, to the folk world, country music, um, almost every style. I mean, you can hear all this. In fact, like what's really interesting is um, the country music. You know, a lot of the instruments were brought over from Africa. You know, that like they would have you know, they had no money, no nothing. They were slaves, but to play music, they would nail up strings, you know,
Mm-hmm.
on the wall and be playing, you know, and so
Anything.
yeah, and also a lot of African American music has been stolen by very well-known musicians and recorded. I'm talking about in the pop world, in the popular world, and not given their due or been paid so little for, you know, for their great art. And so I think that it's really important to bring to people, to audiences, um, great music of every culture. Like, for instance, I really don't know anything about any uh, Middle Eastern composers except for like Israel. I really don't. I don't know Turkish composers. I don't know, you know, any of those types of composers from the Middle East. And so, you know, I've been thinking, you know, I better get on it, Laurel. You know, I better get with it and start learning the music. But right now, I'm
It's
still
intriguing.
really, I'm still into really recording more music by African American composers because there's a huge wealth of it out. There are people now. Her name's Valerie Coleman. unbelievable, wonderful flutist. And in my opinion, even a greater composer. She is just unbelievable. In fact, she'd be a great guest, you know, on the series. And she writes absolutely amazing music. I've only recorded one of her pieces, but I have like a solo flute piece sitting in my garage waiting for me to take it and learn it. Like I have like piles of music all organized, like in piles, like going, come on, Laurel, come on, get it. Go in the garage and get the music and learn it. You know, it's always, yeah, it's just like the composers are thinking, you better learn my music now, you know.
Right, it's here.
There's no time like the present.
Right.
Yeah. And I think now, especially, I mean, there's so much violence in the US right now, and I'm against it. I do not believe, if at all possible, and I think of this situation in the US, we shouldn't be violent. It's bad. It's a bad thing to be violent because there's so many other ways of communication. And I was wondering, like, instead of all the violence and the fires that are going on, what if we had a whole situation where, like, suddenly all the streets of every city were, you know, just full of artistic masterpieces and performers, like dance, art, drama, music, new scientific inventions, and that could really impact people in a very positive way instead of a really scary way.
Really?
There's a song that is by the Beatles, and I just heard it because I was getting a piece of mine Xerox because somebody wanted to buy it, and it's Revolution by the Beatles. And there's a line in there that says, you know, if you're looking for money for destruction, you can count me out, you know. And that's exactly the way I feel about it. I think that there's other ways to do it. You know, you can talk with passion, but as soon as all the violence stops, like, I'm gone. It's such a turnoff for me. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, and obviously there's many people that disagree with me, but so.
Like this vision of an artistic renaissance happening where we are able to be enlightened again by science and technology, by the arts, you know? They've been the guiding light through all of human history, so why not now?
Yeah, instead of, like, I mean, even graffiti can be incredible. Mm-hmm. You know, like I remember Keith Haring in New York City. I was around, he was putting up all his posters and paintings and all that, and they were incredible. They were just amazing. And, you know, I was thinking, instead of destroying all the buildings, they could just go in the streets and, you know, shut down the streets with cars and then just get all these artists out there. People would do it. Can you imagine?
Cover everything with art.
Have done it during COVID. All the musicians, all the dancers, all the drama people, they would all go out. I just think that would be so exciting. Anyway. Beautiful,
beautiful image of the future. Speaking of, I'm going to go off script. I want to ask you on another note.
Yes.
Where do you see the Sacramento Community Concert Association in 10 years?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I have never thought about that. I'd love to see them doing concerts. Yeah, right.
Curveball.
Right, thank you. I would love to see a series at the Mondavi Center, which is a beautiful space. I'd love to see a festival. You know, like Sacramento used to have a jazz festival. You know, remember that?
I do remember that.
Yeah, and in fact, in my neighborhood, there's a couple that used to help organize it. So I was talking to them about it, and I would love to see, you know, that type of thing going on. You know, just spreading out and. But, you know, just, you know, you have to take one little step at a time. You know, you just have to just do it one tiny step at a time. I read this book once, like when I was 30, because I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I record like hundreds of recordings? And I started looking into it, and I figured out things to do. And at that point, I saw a book in the bookstore, Barnes and Nobles, by a man named Anthony Robbins, and big, huge guy. And he gave a system of how you can accomplish things. And, you know, I was good at setting goals, but he gave me a lot of ideas of how to really set goals. And the thing he talked about is like one tiny step at a time, which I was used to doing learning music. I loved that experience. But if you take if you say, okay, I'm going to do one thing today that supports where I want something or an organization to go. If you do one step at a time, you know, in a week, you've got 7 things you've done and actually really accomplished them. And they don't have to be big things. You know, pick up the phone, call somebody, you know, write something down, you know, I mean, just something like that. And so I think, I mean, that's what I've done. That's what I do. And I talk to my students about stuff like that.
Some excellent food for thought for our entire organization into the future.
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't do very much, which I'm very, very sorry of. I've always got so many things going. You know, I wear a lot of hats, and I'm really sorry. I'm very grateful. You're doing so much with the organization. And I think everybody in the organization is so grateful. I mean, you're really a very positive.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ecstatic for the opportunity to be able to work with this team. I mean, the board has been incredibly passionate and vocal, which I appreciate. You know, if you have an idea, I want to hear it. I want to ruminate on it too. I want to know why you're thinking about it so much, and see if it's really in the best interest of our community. How can we really serve them? You know, and serve them.
I think that's right.
You know, the rising tide will lift all of our ships, and music is a powerful, powerful way to raise the tide.
You're a composer as well, right, Carlos?
I am a composer, yes.
Well, have you written a flute piece?
I have not since the university. I wrote a piece that was sort of a study, but I wouldn't wish that upon my enemies. So I have to compose something new, though.
I'll tell you what, if you write me a piece, I'll play it.
Heard it here, folks. I guess I better get to work.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for joining me for this interview today, for this wonderful spotlight on your many, many accomplishments and your many adventures. You are such a bright light to the entire Sacramento community, and we are thrilled. We are so fortunate to be able to call you one of our own at the Sacramento Community Concert Association. So,
and I'm very fortunate to call you one of our own too. And I look forward to going to a restaurant and having a drink with you or something.
Yes, indeed. You already know.
Yeah, to meet you in person, that would be really great, you know?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this afternoon with all of us. And to all of you out there, please donate to support the Sacramento Community Concert Association. You know, we're accepting donations year round. This has been such a challenging time for all of us. And so we only ask that you give out of the abundance of your heart, and that you support us in our journey to bring you quality programming in the Sacramento community right here at home. So thank you. Laurel Zucker, everybody.
Woo! Thank you, Carlos. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Have a great night.